My name is Lindiwe Kumalo, and I'm the acting secretary of the African Commission. I'll be directing the proceedings of this opening ceremony. Before we start the official proceedings, I've been advised to share with distinguished panelists a few ground rules and information. First, all panelists are to ensure that their microphones are muted at this point, and to ensure that after taking the floor, this continues to remain the case. Your choice. For English, it will be English. For French, it will be French. For Portuguese, select Portuguese. But for Arabic, select Korean, the Korean language channel. For ease of identification, please also ensure that your full name is registered or is reflected as your Zoom name. And if you wish to communicate with the organizers for assistance, or to provide information, or to indicate any other matter, please look for the chat feature on your screen and type in your request. Your request will promptly be attended to. I now wish to turn to the official ceremony. Honorable Solomon Deso, Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Excellencies, Ministers of Member States of the African Union, Your Excellency, Sesuma Minata Samate, Commissioner for Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, representing His Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Honorable Justice Sylvain Ore, President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Binyam David Mesmo, member of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, Professor Fatma Zora Karaja, APR panel chairperson of the African Peer Review Mechanism, Your Excellency Ambassador Baye Mokta Diop, chairperson of the Permanent Representative Committee, the Subcommittee on Human Rights and Governance, Honorable Vice Chairperson and Commissioners of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Mr. Mohamed Fayek, Chairperson of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions, Mrs. Hannah Foster, Executive Director of the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies and spokesperson of the NGO Forum, distinguished delegates of state parties to the African Charter, representatives of national human rights institutions, representatives of international organizations, representatives of non-governmental organizations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. May I kindly request Your Excellencies, participants, invited guests, at this point to assume a solemn posture for the African Union anthem. Thank you. The order of proceedings for the opening ceremony will be as follows. First, we will have a statement by the spokesperson of the NGO Forum. This will be followed by a statement by the chairperson of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions. Then we will have a statement by a member of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, followed by a statement by the President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights. After that, we will have a statement by the representative of member states of the African Union. This will be followed by the statement of His Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, which will be delivered by Her Excellency, the Commissioner for Political Affairs. Finally, the Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights will make his statement and declare the 66th ordinary session open. And this will bring the ceremony to a start. I will now call upon spokesperson of the NGO Forum, Mrs. Hannah Foster, to make a statement on behalf of NGOs. Madam Foster, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you, Honorable Chairperson of the occasion. Your Excellency, the Commissioner of Political Affairs, Commissioner Minata Sesuma Samate, Honorable Dr. Solomon Ayale Derso, Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Vice Chairperson and members of the African Commission, the President of the Court, Justice Sylvain Ore. With your kind permission, Madam Chair, I would like to stand on existing protocol. All protocols respectfully observed. On behalf of my colleagues of the forum, on the participation of NGOs in the 66th ordinary session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, it is indeed an honor and a privilege as spokesperson to deliver this statement to this first body on this auspicious occasion. Let me at the onset acknowledge and thank the Honorable Chairperson, Dr. Solomon Ayale Derso, and members of the Commission for affording us this opportunity. At the request of participants, we congratulate the 4 new commissioners who were sworn in on 29th June, namely Commissioners Mumford Mwadenga, Commissioner Dr. Marie-Louise Abombo, Commissioner Mrs. Alexia Anesbori, and Commissioner Ndambegei. We would wish to extend our gratitude to the Acting Secretary, Ms. Lindwe Komolo, and team at the Secretariat in facilitating the activities of the 66th Ordinary Session, the first ever virtual African Commission Ordinary Session. Congratulations. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, following the norm for the holding of meetings in the face of COVID-19, the first ever virtual forum on the participation of NGOs in the work of the African Commission was organized and facilitated by the Center, co-organized by the Center, Defenders, in collaboration with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. The turnout at the forum was beyond expectation, considering the short notice when information was received that the 66th Ordinary Session would proceed on the 13th of July. It is worthy to note that participation was reflective of the mutual and professional interest in the work of the African Commission. This led to adoption of commendable outcomes. Over 290 representatives registered, whilst over 135 representatives from 32 African countries, including participants from Europe, Israel, and North Africa, were able to connect and participate during the 2 days, whilst questions, submissions, and inquiries were sent online to the Secretariat for clarification. I would want to highlight a few of the outcomes. The forum was restricted this time round to only 3 plenary panels and 10 breakaway groups. And we all have seen that from all parts of the world, human rights violations have remained a major concern in most countries. Since late December 2019, the coronavirus, which causes COVID-19, has held the world captive with uncertainty, fear, and insecurity. In most countries, we've seen the freedom of association and assembly remain a major cause for concern in most of the countries reviewed. Moreover, we've seen also the challenge of corruption remaining real, already adding to existing social and economic ills around the world, and particularly in Africa. We've seen the formulation and implementation of legislation to curb the enjoyment of these fundamental freedoms by citizens, freedom of expression, decriminalization of bloggers, and internet restrictions continue to hinder the independence and freedom of journalists and like-minded groups. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it was reported that systematic harassment and targeting of human rights defenders in many countries persist and or have intensified. The closing of civic space remained on the agenda with the existence of restrictive legislation. It was asserted that a lot more needs to be done as many African countries continue to face challenges of insecurity, violence, terror attacks, and the volatile situation brought about by COVID-19. With emphasis those countries whose state reports will be considered during the 66th session, namely Cameroon, Mauritius, and Niger, the forum congratulated these three and called on the Commission to encourage other countries that have outstanding reports to meet their obligations. Madam Chairperson, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is in the spirit of upholding the principle of ensuring all human rights for all. The forum would therefore like to urge more states and NGOs to use and popularize the African Commission processes and decisions, and to encourage states to comply with decisions, as well as consider signing Article 34.6 of the protocol. We had challenges of Benin and Cote d'Ivoire withdrawing their signature of Article 34.6. And we would like to urge the Commission to enter into dialogue with them to ensure that they are encouraged to review their decision. The overcrowding of prisons due to non-observance of judicial guarantees in respect of remand detainees, as well as standard minimum rules, also has created challenges. And the forum calls on the African Commission to urge states to respect and implement all laws governing the treatment of prisoners, especially in this time of COVID, which has brought about an extension of the laws that are being, restrictive laws that are being implemented. Africa is set for elections in 2020. We want to congratulate Malawi for holding peaceful elections in this time of COVID. The current state of unrest as a result of post-electoral violence in Mali leaves a lot to be desired, and the forum emphasized the importance of collaboration between various stakeholders, including CSOs, to set up early warning systems to potential conflict and to enhance the democratic machinery. Is a crucial factor in addressing this phenomenon. These conversations took place with the AU theme of silencing the gun in Africa by 2020 in mind, overshadowed by the impact of COVID on human rights and governance in Africa. In line with the objectives of networking in Africa, the participants were able to share experiences and responses during the COVID pandemic was shared, as well as strategies for the post-COVID interventions. The threat has dampened the intentions of collectively accelerating efforts to end wars and the crisis of conflict in Africa. It has considerably slowed down the agenda of silencing the guns in Africa. The forum recognized that the numerous conflicts, terrorism, among others, contributed to a large extent to the high number of refugees, migrants, and IDPs, and wishes to congratulate the African Union for dedicating 2020 to this very important and mutual theme of interest. Whereas it is hoped that this initiative will promote peace and stability on the continent with the goal of ending wars, civil conflicts, gender-based violence, and violent conflicts, its achievement is becoming elusive in the face of COVID-19. It was observed that it is ironic that Africa does not manufacture guns, but yet has the highest proliferation of arms than those countries that do. The budget allocations to the purchase of arms and armaments is so high compared to allocations to education and health. Humanitarian access has also become very problematic. The forum took this opportunity to call on the African Commission and urge states that have not ratified pertinent treaties to speedily do so in order to enable their implementation as the enjoyment of those rights by all citizens. We were also able to review the progress in terms of implementation of UN Resolution 1325, which anniversary is 20 years this year, as well as Beijing plus 25. And it is also a cause for concern that with COVID-19, there has been an increase of gender-based violence registered in most of the countries that have been reviewed by the forum. Participants noted and congratulated the African Commission for all the gains made in fulfillment of its mandate by being the first AU organ to issue a release drawing attention to the existence of COVID and urging the need to adopt a human rights approach in response to the pandemic. As members of civil society, we continue to pledge our support for the work of the Africa's premier human rights institution. We continue to urge as many of our participants and their constituencies to apply for observer status, which will enable them to play their role and benefit from the access provided. The forum hereby calls on all stakeholders to recommit themselves and their efforts towards sustaining and strengthening this institution, as well as safeguarding its independence. It is gratifying to note that despite the challenging environment, a good number of virtual side events were organized. In conclusion, the forum wishes to extend its most sincere appreciation to all our partners and supporters, and we wish to appreciate other partners who have under constraints supported the work of civil society. Your Excellencies, Madam Chairperson, honorable members of the African Commission, distinguished guests, on behalf of the participants of NGOs in the work of the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission, I extend to you, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Vice Chairperson, and all the commissioners of this august body, our best wishes for a fruitful session. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Madam Foster. I would now like to invite the chairperson of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions, Mr. Mohamed Fayek, to make his statement.
Ordinary session of the African Commission. I also commend the African Commission for considering it important to hold this virtual session despite the difficult times imposed on us by the COVID-19 pandemic. I also take this opportunity to congratulate the new commissioners of the African Commission for their appointment to the highest human rights office on the continent. In a special way, allow me, Madam, to congratulate Commissioner Matford Zakaria, Chairperson of Zambia Human Rights Commission and member of NANRI Steering Committee, for his appointment to the African Commission. It is an honor having one of our members to be sitting at this prominent human rights organ. I was also myself personally honored to be a member of this commission 11 years ago. NANRI National Human Rights Institutes have been on the forefront in supporting the work of the African Commission and the recent adoption of the revised rules of procedure. It is an important development aiming at improving the Commission's functioning, including the issue relating to its autonomy and its various competencies to interpret the African Charter and its own decisions. At NANRI, we are in the final stage of developing an online information center, which will be one-stop shop for all documents and decisions of the African Union Human Rights Mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, the advent of COVID-19 pandemic has thrown the world into a spin, with states taking extraordinary measures to contain this deadly virus, as imposing curfew, states of emergency, and so on. These measures were well-intended steps to curtail the virus. However, in some countries, these measures were brutally enforced in the form of forced quarantine, arbitrary arrests, beatings, and maiming. Worse still, people have been shot dead for non-compliance. The measures of curbing COVID-19 have also occasioned the rise of gender-based violence, especially at homes. This has been linked to the fact that the victims and the perpetrators are confined in the same house. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, some of our actions included calling on states to decongest prisons and other places of detention to reduce the risk of contamination. We are glad to report that more than 47,000 prisoners and the detainees were released across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move into the new normal, we must not forget other human rights issues. For instance, terrorism has become an endemic to certain parts of the continent, especially countries such as Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, among others, have suffered multiple attacks from organizations like Boko Haram, terror group, claiming thousands of lives over the last few years. Infrastructures networks have been destroyed. Terrorism and other forms of armed conflicts are eating into the gains of silencing the guns by 2020 as envisioned by the African Union. Migration, especially inter-Africa, remains another big challenge which requires urgent action. These majority transboundary issues require a multifaceted approach and close cooperation with national, regional, and partners to surmount them. We are ready to work with the states, NGOs, and other human rights defenders towards progressive and sustainable solutions in these acts. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, we ensure you of our utmost commitment to the improving of the human rights situation in Africa. We will call for a pluralistic and consultative process in ensuring the holistic and sustainable approach to traditional and current human rights issues. Most importantly, preparedness strategies must be in place to ensure appropriate, effective, efficient, and decisive response to the future crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fayek, for your statement. I now have the pleasure to invite Honorable Binyam David Mesmo, member of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Chair, to deliver his statement. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Commissioner of Political Affairs, Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Commissioners of the African Commission, Excellencies, colleagues, distinguished participants. I also say all protocols observed. I would like to extend appreciation to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights for inviting the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child to its 66th ordinary session. I further commend the Commission for organizing the session despite ongoing challenges. But of course, thank you greatly for the invitation extended further because we don't take it for granted. Before I move to the substantive remarks, I want to start by thanking your chairperson for taking part in the opening of our session in December 2019 in Cairo, as well as for also engaging with us and contributing significantly to the day of general discussion that we had on children and armed conflict. Excellencies, colleagues, and distinguished participants, I would not be original to say that COVID-19 continues to impact every aspect of life as we know it. And it looks like it will stay here far longer than we had initially hoped. The outbreak continues to scourge the socio-economic stability of the world, and the African continent is not spared that much. It has raised a long list of concerns in the protection of human rights, of course, including children's rights. Reports indicate, for example, excessive use of force by law enforcement in enforcing lockdown measures, instances of police brutality in this context, which often, as you would know, affect children in street situations disproportionately. The temporary discontinuation of public services with the implication of inability for millions to fulfill basic needs or to benefit from protection, including child helplines or child justice courts, is a serious concern for the African Committee. The interruption of the informal sector activities on which the majority of African families depend for their livelihoods and the exacerbation of challenges faced by vulnerable members of society is central to the child rights challenges that are posed by the pandemic. So the direct effect of the pandemic might seem to have largely spared children. But being among the most vulnerable members of society, they are particularly hard hit by the indirect impact that the pandemic is having. Millions of children in Africa face increasing threats to their safety and well-being, including sexual and gender-based violence. Millions more are temporarily out of school due to the pandemic. Significantly, children with disabilities, children who belong to economically disadvantaged parents, and children living in rural areas, as well as children that are seeking asylum or refugee status, are significantly affected. The pandemic is likely to result in a devastating effect on family functioning by limiting sources of income for households, resulting in limited access to adequate nutritious food, healthcare, and so forth. And while I'm on the issue of healthcare, one aspect of healthcare that often seems to be missed in most of the discussion is the issue of mental health. The mental health of children and the extent to which the pandemic is taking a toll on them is something that will probably live much longer than the pandemic itself. Excellencies, colleagues, and distinguished participants, these aforementioned challenges are not easy challenges for our governments to respond to. There is, of course, no one clear solution or one-size-fits-all approach in addressing the ongoing multifaceted challenge. But few things are very clear, particularly one for the colleagues that are gathered here today: the fact that member states can benefit from the guidance of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and of course, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. As the African Committee, we've issued a guidance note to member states based on the norms of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, but also taking into account the realities of our African countries. The guidance note aims to assist member states in ensuring that children's rights and welfare are not neglected or violated unnecessarily in the various measures introduced to curb and mitigate the spread of the pandemic. We have already presented the guidance note to the Peace and Security Council in May 2020, which fortunately encouraged states to endorse it. And of course, the guidance note helps us to see the pandemic beyond the right to the highest attainable standard of health lens, also focusing on education, protection, children in armed conflict, nutrition and stunting, child justice, social protection, including child support grants, and emphasizing the important role that needs to be provided for children that are deprived of their family environments. Excellencies, colleagues, and distinguished participants, I would also like to take this opportunity to commend the detailed press statement as well as press release that the Commission issued focusing on human rights, but also emphasizing the important role of economic, social, and cultural rights. I would be remiss not to mention that the Commission and all those present today to use these documents in a child-focused manner. Moreover, cognizant of the dynamic nature of the virus, human rights monitoring organs need to remain vigilant in monitoring the human rights dimension of ongoing and future measures and take necessary actions to assist member states in a timely manner. Excellencies, colleagues, and distinguished participants, I have to emphasize that as we undertake the deliberations on COVID-19 and human rights, we need to play specific role and emphasis on children's rights in particular. We need to be cognizant of the reality on our continent too. For example, while hand washing has been highlighted as a basic measure, we need to recognize that millions of children on the African continent don't have that. While we speak of online learning for children that are out of school, we cannot lose fact that internet connection remains a luxury for few of us in Africa, as well as the fact that many online materials remain to be available in English, limiting access in local languages. If we have learned any lessons from the Ebola crisis in West Africa, we can't turn a blind eye to the important role that religious and opinion leaders play in communities. If anything, the current pandemic is showing how human rights are interdependent, the importance of socioeconomic rights, as well as the fact that for development to have sustainability, it should be anchored on a solid human rights foundation. We need to build better with a child rights agenda at the center. creating an Africa fit for children neither demands nor deserves anything less. Excellencies, colleagues, and distinguished participants, let me end with two invitations. One, to the next online session of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the details of which will be formally communicated through a letter to the African Commission. And secondly, as the African Committee, we are considering a general comment on the important subject matter of female genital mutilation. And we hope, and I would even say we expect, to join hands with the African Commission in taking this endeavor forward. Thank you very much. And again, I wish you a very fruitful deliberation.
Thank you, Honorable Mesmo, for your statement on behalf of the Children's Committee. It is now my pleasure to invite the President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Justice Sylvain Ore, to make his statement. Honorable Justice Ore, you have the floor. It appears as if Honorable Justice Ore may have been disconnected. I believe he was online earlier. If Justice Ore is not online, it is my singular honor to invite His Excellency Ambassador Baye Mokhtar Diop, the chairperson of the PRC Subcommittee on Human Rights and Governance, to make his statement on behalf of member states of the African Union. Ambassador? Is he speaking? Your Excellencies, honorable participants, it does appear that network has failed. In view of this, I would like to proceed with the program. And at this point, it is my pleasure to invite the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Solomon Ayele Deso, to deliver his statement.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much, Acting Executive Secretary, Ms. Lindiwe Kumalo. Excellencies, ministers and representatives of member states of the African Union, state parties to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Your Excellency, Tesuma Minata Samata, Commissioner for Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, representing His Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Honorable Justice Sylvain Ore, President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights. Honorable Binyam Dawit Mezmour, Member of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the African Child. Professor Fatma Dara, Chairperson of the African Peer Review Mechanism Panel. Your Excellency Ambassador Bai Mokhtar Diop, Chairperson of the PRC Subcommittee on Human Rights and Governance. Honorable Vice Chairperson Remy Ngoy-Lumbu, Honorable Members of the Commission on Human and People's Rights. Mr. Mohamed Faeke, former member of the African Commission, Chairperson of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions. Ms. Hannah Foster, Executive Director of the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies. Distinguished delegates of states parties to the African Charter, representatives of national human rights institutions, representatives of international organizations, representatives of African Union institutions, representatives of non-governmental organizations, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Allow me at the outset to welcome you all on my own behalf and on behalf of the members of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to this 66th ordinary session of the African Commission. As most of you would be aware, this session was scheduled to take place in April of this year at the seat of the African Commission in Banjul, the Gambia. We also intended to take this opportunity of the session to invite His Excellency, the African Union Chairperson, Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, to lay the foundation stone of the headquarters of the African Commission. With arrival and the slow but steady spread of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, we were unable to proceed as initially planned. We announced the postponement of the session, signaling our plan to hold the session at some future time. COVID-19 continues to spread, and it became clear that the Commission couldn't hold its session physically anytime soon. It had also become clear that the work of the Commission has become more urgent during this emergency that the pandemic triggered than in normal times. Accordingly, we moved our session to this virtual platform. 2 weeks ago, we held the 28th extraordinary session of the Commission. We did this to administer in public the solemn declaration of oaths of the 4 new members of the Commission. I wish, since then, the 4 new members of the Commission have assumed their offices as members of the Commission. I wish to take this opportunity to once again extend to each of them a warm welcome and to wish them success during their stay at the African Commission. It would be remiss of me if I also don't take this opportunity to express my profound appreciation to the 4 outgoing members of the Commission, whom I would like to wish success in their next endeavors. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we live in an unprecedented time and conditions. What we face today are not ordinary human rights issues requiring ordinary approach. COVID-19 and its consequences have excavated and brought to the center of our attention the most defining human rights issues of our time: deepening inequalities, widespread poverty, racism, sexism, crisis of democratic governance, and climate emergency. COVID-19 laid bare the structural weaknesses and fragilities of our societies. It brought to the forefront of the public view the socioeconomic deprivations afflicting the masses of our people, deprivations that have left those without access to water, sanitation, housing, education, and sustainable employment vulnerable to the scourge of COVID-19 and its consequences, thereby making all of our societies weak and vulnerable, not only to COVID-19, but also to the effects of COVID-19. Because for COVID-19, the strong among us is as strong as the weakest among us. If the weakest among us is not protected, no one of us can be safe and secure from COVID-19. In this sense, COVID-19 can indeed be regarded as an equalizer. But COVID-19 is most importantly a magnifier of the fragilities of our societies. I would like to submit that while COVID-19 affects all of us in the way that I have noted just above, its impact is particularly dire on the most vulnerable among our societies, including people working in the informal sector, the majority of people on our continent, many of whom are women, people living in highly congested areas, people without homes, people with no access to water and poor sanitation, people with underlying conditions, IDPs, refugees, migrants. As have been noted by Professor Binia Mazbour, children are among the most vulnerable. These sections of our people are most affected in multiple ways. Because of lack of access to water and sanitation, their living conditions do not allow them to observe the hygiene requirements of protecting themselves from COVID-19. Because of their living conditions, they neither are able to observe social distancing measures, living in highly congested conditions. Because of the measures that have been taken nationally and internationally, their livelihoods have been disrupted. I wish to observe that these conditions of widespread vulnerabilities arising from the lack of provision for socioeconomic rights in our continent is a result of major gaps in the social and economic policy of our states, the perpetuation of the legacies of colonialism and apartheid, deficiencies in priority setting in the development agenda of our countries, the nature of our economies dependent on very few export items such as natural resources, oil, the economic development paradigm that our countries follow, and the global financial and economic system champions. In other words, the vulnerabilities of our societies are products of not only legacies of historical past, but also policy choices, wrong policy choices that have been made, and failures on the part of our political and economic systems. COVID-19 is also a human rights issue, and as have been pointed out, it threatens health and life. These are the most basic of our rights. That is why the Commission issued on 28th February the first African Union statement from the African human rights system, and later on 24th March. I think it's important to also note that the nature of COVID-19 response measures, and perhaps importantly, how states go about enforcing these measures, have given rise to a wide range of governance and human rights problems. The concern that we have is that we face the danger of COVID-19 pandemic descending into a human rights emergency. We have noted in the course of this pandemic a large number of human rights issues coming to the fore, from excessive use of force by security enforcement to the spike in gender-based violence, to the exclusion of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees from protection, to exposure of the homeless. These and many other issues that we have observed in the course of this pandemic. And it is indeed against this background that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights issued on 24th March 2020 a statement with a comprehensive guideline trying to deal with excessive restrictions of rights, trying to respond to restrictions on the rights, excessive use of force, and the many other human rights issues that have been reported in the course of this pandemic. For us, on the African human rights system, it's not simply the human rights issues arising from COVID-19 response measures that are of major concern and preoccupation. One other major area of preoccupation for us on the African human rights system relates to the severe socioeconomic and humanitarian consequences of COVID-19 and COVID-19 response measures. Supply chains have been disrupted, demand for resources have fallen, creating revenue loss for a number of countries, including, for example, South Sudan, a very vulnerable country, for whom oil accounts for 98% of total exports. Remittances have dropped sharply, affecting many countries on the continent, for whom remittances constitute a major source of foreign currency. The airline and tourism sectors have been disrupted. The burden of the continent, reaching 64% of the continent's total GDP in 2020, has left limited or no physical policy space for taking mitigating socioeconomic relief measures by states. According to the World Bank, in sub-Saharan Africa, the pandemic has sparked the region's first recession in 25 years, with economic growth projected to decline sharply. With up to 89% of those employed on the continent in the informal sector having been affected, there are major fears that this situation may erase years of development gains in various areas of development indicators. As African economies go into depression, millions of people face loss of jobs and livelihoods. Tens of millions of people are projected to be pushed to extreme poverty. The World Food Programme warns that in the context of COVID-19, many people, particularly those in conflict-affected countries, especially women and children, face being pushed to the brink of starvation, with the specter of famine in regions affected by violence and conflict very real and dangerous possibility. The youth, who constitute the sizable portion of the population of the continent, face not only loss of current opportunities, but also a future with no or limited social and economic prospects. It was against this background that myself and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Bachelet, issued a joint statement on 20 May, highlighting the catastrophic impact of these widespread socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19 on human and people's rights in Africa. Our statement underscored that global solidarity involving economic relief measures by way of debt relief or restructuring measures is a human rights necessity. I expressed the view of the Commission in saying that such global action, together with national mitigation measures directed to strengthen Africa's health systems, maintain food supplies, avoid financial crisis, support education, protect jobs, keep households and business afloat, and cushion the continent against lost income and export earnings are the prerequisite to prevent the socioeconomic and humanitarian consequences of COVID-19 from becoming a human rights catastrophe for the continent. Dear brothers and sisters, fellow Africans, over the course of the past many years, Africa's economic growth performance has been hailed, giving rise to the Africa Rising narrative. While there is no doubt about the GDP growth that large number of African countries registered over the years, this has been a growth that hasn't changed the lot of the masses of the people on the continent languishing in poverty. Indeed, COVID-19 has exposed the hollowness of this growth narrative, the pervasive fragilities of the economies of the continent, the deep inequalities which pervade most of our African societies. The arrival of COVID laid bare the pervasiveness of poverty, lack of social protection, limited access to food, to water and sanitation, instability, conflict, expanding environmental degradation, lack of access to basic healthcare and decent housing. This means that we have serious challenges awaiting us. These can have catastrophic consequences to the rights of the most vulnerable. Both the structural vulnerabilities and the emerging challenges necessitate that we probe and indeed put on trial the nature of our social and economic governance, and indeed the economic development model dominant on the continent and indeed across the world. COVID-19 forced us to reorient from a focus on GDP growth to a focus on human development. We need to avert the priority, the policy in which socioeconomic rights are marginalized, in which there is a trend of commodification of socioeconomic rights. We need to articulate and develop social and economic development policy that invests in socioeconomic rights, that affirms these rights and their funding as the collective public good, as fundamental rights. This is not only a human rights necessity, but also a smart policy. This also demands that we revisit the role of the state. The rights enshrined in the African Charter demand and require a highly capable and accountable state. They demand a state that has the policy space to make policy choices for crafting a development path that tackles the socioeconomic and ecological vulnerabilities of our societies, that tackles the gendered and generational inequalities and race-based oppressions that affect our people, not only the continent, but also outside of the continent. The challenge before us is therefore, can we seize the opportunity that COVID-19 presents for rethinking development policy, rethinking our system of governance, for articulating and building constituency and source of funding for a new human-centered development paradigm, for redefining state-society relationship, and for changing the fragile and highly dysfunctional social contract on which existing patterns of inequalities, misgovernance, gender oppression are founded. The window of opportunity is narrow, and the focus of states, the forces of status quo will come back, and we will do so with a vengeance unless we create facts on the ground by actually mobilizing and taking all the necessary measures. Will we rise to the occasion and take appropriate action to change the fundamentals on the ground? What is the hope that we should articulate to our people? The hope that we should articulate to the masses of our youth. It is on us, members in the human rights community, state parties to the African Charter, civic society organizations, national human rights institutions, and international organizations, to take this challenge and respond very forcefully. It is also a generational challenge we shouldn't fail to address. It is a challenge of developing and rolling out a people's agenda for a socially just and ecologically sustainable development for a post-COVID-19 Africa, which would address all the human rights issues that have been highlighted by many of the speakers that spoke before me. Useful points of departure for developing the blueprint for this new approach tackles head-on the human rights issues, these human rights issues of our time, is to be found in a report that Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, submitted to the UN Human Rights Council early this month on 2 July 2020. As he put it, the world is at an existential crossroads involving a pandemic, a deep economic recession, devastating climate change, extreme inequality, and an uprising against racist policies and gender oppression, I would add. The report accordingly proposes the following corrective measures. 1, reconceiving the relationship between growth and poverty elimination. 2, tackling inequality and embracing redistribution. 3, promoting tax justice. 4, implementing universal social protection. 5, centering the role of government. 6, embracing participatory governance, inclusive governance. 7, adopting international poverty measurement. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you will have seen on the agenda, in relation to the item 3 on human rights situation in Africa, the Commission has exercised its prerogative to focus the discussion on an issue of specific concern. This relates to the issues that I have highlighted above. We look forward to engaging with all stakeholders on the challenge which have arisen across the continent in this context. Also to hear about some of the measures that have been taken to address and prevent such human rights violations from occurring, about the priorities that should inform policymaking, not only in relation to COVID-19, but also the human rights issues of our time: deepening inequalities, pervasive poverty, racism, sexism, the democratic governance crisis, and the climate emergency post-COVID-19. Of course, at the African Commission, we are also cognizant of the various human rights issues that continue to affect many people on our continent, beyond and outside of COVID-19. Points that have been made reference to earlier on by previous speakers. And we continue to urge states to shoulder their responsibilities in protecting people and also in not becoming the cause of violations of human rights. In conclusion, I would like to extend our gratitude to the various stakeholders of the Commission attending this session, particularly given the difficult circumstances under which it is taking place, as well as the virtual nature of the session. Your continued interest and support to the Commission is one of the main factors which has contributed to the success of its sessions. I would also wish to thank my colleague, the Vice Chairperson, members of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, as well as the Acting Secretary and staff of the Secretariat for the great work that has been accomplished in order to put together this session. With this, I would like to thank all of you for your kind attention and look forward to a very productive and groundbreaking session of the African Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson Deso, for your statement. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, the virtual nature of the proceedings present us with uncertainties of all kinds. I do recognize now that Justice Ore has now rejoined us. And after consultation and respecting and recognizing all protocol, may I invite the President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Justice Sylvan Ore, to make his statement.
Thank you very much, Acting Executive Secretary Lidiwe. It's very unfortunate that due to technology issues, I find myself intervening just after the host of this event made his speech. But it has not compromised the order of precedence during this event. And it emphasized the principle of complementarity between the two organs. I will make my speak in French. Excellence, Madame la commissaire Sessouma Samate, commissaire aux affaires politiques de l'Union africaine, représentant le président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, honorable commissaire Dr Solomon Ayele Desso, président de la Commission africaine, honorable vice-président et honorable commissaire de la Commission africaine, honorables invités, distingués invités. L'histoire retiendra que pour la première fois de son histoire, la session ordinaire de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples se tiendra sans les effusions physiques d'affection que suscite la joie des retrouvailles des acteurs de la communauté africaine des droits de l'homme, acteurs, organes institutionnels et des organisations non gouvernementales et qui rendent uniques les dites sessions. Cependant, que la 66e session ordinaire puisse se tenir après que vous ayez expérimenté une session virtuelle à travers la 28e session extraordinaire constitue le témoignage de votre engagement sans faille pour la cause des droits de l'homme en Afrique. La dernière session de la Cour, tenue dans les mêmes conditions, participe de la même détermination, car toute crise, en ce qu'elle est un moment exceptionnel, porte en elle-même un péril pour les droits de l'homme. Vous avez, Monsieur le Président, relevé à juste titre lors de votre 28e session extraordinaire l'importance du rôle de la Commission pour assurer la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme en cette période. Nous nous réjouissons aussi de la déclaration à la presse sur une réponse efficace fondée sur les droits de l'homme au nouveau virus COVID-19 en Afrique, publiée par la Commission en mars 2020, qui fournit des orientations aux États parties à la Charte africaine sur la manière de placer les droits de l'homme au centre de leur réponse face à la COVID-19, ainsi que l'adoption de déclarations thématiques portant sur différents aspects des réponses des États à la COVID-19. Monsieur le Président, au moment où je m'adresse à vous solennellement, pour la première fois, comme président de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, permettez-moi de vous féliciter, ainsi que votre vice-président Rémi Ngoy, pour votre brillante élection à la tête de cette prestigieuse institution. Pour vous avoir vu à l'œuvre en tant que commissaire, j'ai pu admirer votre compétence et votre passion pour la cause des droits de l'homme en Afrique. Que votre mandat soit couronné de succès. Mes félicitations s'adressent de manière aussi vive aux honorables Dr Marie-Louise Abomo, Mudfort Zakaria Mwendenga, Ndiame Gaye, Alexia Gertrude Amesbury, nouveaux commissaires pour leur élection. J'ai été témoin le 29 dernier lors de la session extraordinaire de la déclaration qui a été faite en vertu donc de l'article 10 du règlement de la commission, du règlement intérieur de la Commission africaine. J'ai donc été témoin, par vidéoconférence bien entendu, de votre déclaration. Le parcours antérieur témoigne de tout le mérite qui est le leur et qui a convaincu l'Afrique de leur faire confiance. Je vous souhaite plein succès dans votre nouvelle mission. Monsieur le Président Derso, cher commissaire, aujourd'hui plus qu'hier, vous voilà engagé dans l'œuvre de complémentarité de la Cour que je préside avec la Commission. Cette complémentarité qui se construit par sédimentation, mais sûrement doit se poursuivre. Notre rencontre lors de la dernière session ont permis des avancées qu'il convient de rendre effectives. Nous ne devrons pas manquer d'occasion d'approfondir le processus de complémentarité. Le projet de règlement de la Cour que nous vous avons transmis pour avis participe de ce processus. Nous attendons beaucoup de votre expertise. Monsieur le Président, rarement les résultats de vos travaux ne seront attendus avec beaucoup d'impatience, de gravité et d'espoir pour l'Afrique. En premier lieu, en raison de la pandémie de la COVID-19 qui questionne notre capacité de réaction conceptuelle et pratique. Son ampleur et sa particularité qui se distinguent des crises institutionnelles qui ont été notre lot sur ce continent nous met en face de nouveaux défis. Nos organes, en ces moments périlleux, ne doivent pas fléchir dans l'application de leur doctrine des restrictions et dérogations des droits de l'homme. Comme adopté, la seule raison légitime pour justifier ces limitations des droits et libertés se trouve à l'article 27.2 de la Charte, qui doivent être mises en œuvre dans le cadre d'une loi d'application générale en respectant le critère de proportionnalité pour évaluer l'impact, la nature et la portée de la limitation par rapport à l'intérêt légitime de l'État. À certaines fins, cet intérêt légitime devant être proportionnel aux avantages recherchés et absolument nécessaire. En second lieu, l'année 2020 est une année électorale dans de nombreux États. Les observations qui précèdent sont valables en cette matière puisque nos jurisprudences sur les limitations prennent pour la plupart leurs sources dans ce contexte. La Commission a élaboré de nombreuses règles et directives à suivre par les États et l'heure est venue d'observer la plus haute vigilance sur ces points. Plus que jamais, comme je l'avais souligné dans mon discours lors de la dernière session, il ne saurait y avoir une paix durable en l'absence de justice. Et qu'en l'absence d'une paix durable, le développement est compromis. Votre capacité d'intervention rapide sera mise à rude épreuve. Mais je ne doute pas que les différents mécanismes et organes thématiques que vous avez mis en place sauront relever le défi. Les réalisations de vos mandats précédents permettent cet espoir. Notre solidarité vous est acquise. C'est en formulant le vœu augural que les résultats de votre session confirme cette attente que je souhaite plein succès à vos travaux. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Honorable Justice Ore, for your statement. At this juncture, it is now my pleasure and great honor to invite Her Excellency Sesuma Minata Samate to deliver her opening statement on behalf of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, and to declare the ordinary session open. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Lindoue Koumalo. Honorable Dr Solomon Ayele Derso, président de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Honorable Sylvain Auré, président de la Cour africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Monsieur le vice-président de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Monsieur le président du comité d'experts africains sur les droits et le bien-être de l'enfant. Mesdames et messieurs les commissaires de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Mesdames et messieurs les chefs de délégation, monsieur l'ambassadeur du Sénégal, président du sous-comité du COREP sur les droits humains et la gouvernance, mesdames et messieurs les délégués des États partis à la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, mesdames et messieurs les représentants des institutions nationales africaines des droits de l'homme, mesdames et messieurs les représentants de la société civile et des organisations non gouvernementales, distingués invités, chers collègues, mesdames et messieurs. C'est un honneur pour moi de m'adresser à votre auguste assemblée à l'occasion de la 66e session ordinaire de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, au nom de son Excellence M. Moussa Faki Mahamat, président de la Commission de l'Union africaine. J'exprime ma reconnaissance à la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples pour avoir pris l'initiative d'organiser cette importante réunion de manière virtuelle en raison de la pandémie du coronavirus. Je félicite l'honorable Solomon Ayele Derso, président de la Commission africaine, pour son accession à la présidence et je le rassure de la pleine collaboration de la Commission de l'Union africaine et particulièrement du département des affaires politiques. J'adresse également mes félicitations à vos collègues, Monsieur le Président, vos collègues commissaires de la Commission pour le travail abattu et surtout travail en vue de la promotion et de la protection des droits de l'homme et des peuples sur le continent africain. Je saisis cette occasion pour féliciter et souhaiter la bienvenue aux nouveaux commissaires pour leur accession à ce poste et surtout leur souhaiter plein succès dans leur noble et exaltante mission. Et je souhaite également la bienvenue et mes vœux de succès à tous les participants à cette session. Je voudrais également saluer Madame Lindoue Koumalo et les membres du secrétariat de la Commission pour leur soutien au travail de cet important organe de l'Union africaine. Mesdames et messieurs, au moment où nous conjuguons nos efforts pour la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme et des peuples, nous devons garder à l'esprit les défis auxquels le continent africain est confronté, particulièrement en cette période de la pandémie du COVID-19. Au-delà de la poursuite de nos nobles objectifs pour une plus grande jouissance des droits civils, des libertés politiques, des droits économiques et sociaux, nous devons redoubler d'efforts pour faire en sorte que les citoyens africains jouissent du droit à l'alimentation, à l'eau potable, à l'assainissement, au droit à la santé, à un logement décent, l'éducation, etc. Je rappelle que la décision de nos chefs d'État et de gouvernement déclarant solennellement la décennie des droits de l'homme et des peuples insiste sur la nécessité de la promotion et de la protection des droits de l'homme. Le plan décennal qui accompagne le plan d'action et qui soutient également nos États membres doivent être notre levier pour nous acquitter de nos obligations en matière des droits de l'homme. Malgré ces décisions de nos dirigeants et les textes juridiques sur les droits de l'homme, le continent africain fait toujours face aux nombreux défis et le président Derso a longuement insisté sur ces défis que sont les guerres, la pauvreté, la corruption, la gouvernance, l'exclusion, etc. Les guerres, les crises et autres attaques terroristes malheureusement continuent avec les violations des droits de l'homme dans cette difficile situation en raison de la COVID-19 et cela malgré les appels à un cessez-le-feu mondial par le secrétaire général des Nations Unies et également le président de la Commission de l'Union africaine. Le temps est venu pour les États membres de notre continent africain de redoubler d'efforts aussi bien individuellement que collectivement pour promouvoir et sauvegarder les libertés, les droits, la justice, l'égalité, la dignité humaine en mettant effectivement en œuvre tous les instruments et mécanismes relatifs à ces droits. Et je remercie le président Derso pour avoir insisté sur les mesures et actions à mettre en œuvre pour l'émergence des droits humains sur le continent africain. Vous conviendrez avec moi que l'aspiration 3 de l'agenda 2063 envisage une Afrique de bonne gouvernance, de démocratie et de respect des droits de l'homme, de justice et de l'état de droit. Cette aspiration met l'accent sur la nécessité de construire une culture des droits de l'homme afin que nous puissions avoir et réaliser une Afrique unie, prospère et pacifique. À cet égard, la réunion de ce jour témoigne justement de cet attachement et de cet engagement pour atteindre cet objectif et atteindre l'Afrique que nous voulons. Je souhaite également saisir cette occasion pour appeler tous les États membres de l'Union africaine à coopérer. Coopérer avec tous les organes qu'ils ont eux-mêmes mis en place, tels que la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, la Cour africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, le Conseil consultatif de la lutte contre la corruption, le Comité d'experts africains sur les droits et le bien-être de l'enfant et d'autres organes compétents, afin de veiller à ce que les droits de l'homme et la dignité soient pleinement renforcés et soient une réalité sur le continent africain. À cet égard, je lance également un appel aux États membres de soumettre des rapports réguliers aux institutions qu'ils ont eux-mêmes mis en place conformément à l'agenda des droits de l'homme. C'est à ce prix et seulement à ce prix que nous serons en phase avec les principes inscrits dans nos instruments sur les valeurs partagées. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, la 66e session ordinaire de la Commission se tient à un moment, et tous mes préopinants l'ont signalé, relevé à un moment où le monde entier et notre continent traversent une difficile situation en raison de la pandémie de la COVID-19 et son impact sur les droits de l'homme. Les États membres de l'Union africaine ont la responsabilité première en matière de respect des droits de l'homme dans de telles circonstances. Les mesures de riposte à la COVID-19 doivent être inclusives pour ne laisser personne de côté en s'inspirant des principes consacrés dans nos instruments juridiques et particulièrement la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. alors que la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples se prépare à prendre des mesures et des recommandations pour la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme et des peuples, je sollicite le soutien, et j'insiste là-dessus, le soutien de nos États membres pour explorer ensemble la possibilité de l'élaboration d'un ensemble d'orientations, et le président Derso a insisté là-dessus, des orientations et des actions qui aideront nos États membres à adopter une approche inclusive des droits de l'homme pour répondre à la pandémie du coronavirus. Je suis convaincu, mesdames et messieurs, que les délibérations et les conclusions de cette session ordinaire contribueront grandement à renforcer l'efficacité du système des droits de l'homme et des peuples en Afrique, en particulier actuellement avec la pandémie du coronavirus. Au nom de son Excellence, M. Moussa Faki Mahamat, président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, je déclare ouverte la 66e session ordinaire de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Je souhaite un plein succès à votre session et je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Samatta, for your statement on behalf of His Excellency Moussa Faki Mahamat. This brings us to the end of the opening ceremony of the 66th Ordinary Session. At this point, all dignitaries, delegates, and participants will observe a health break. This will allow the Commission to retreat into a short private session in which the Commission will adopt the agenda for the public session. The public session will resume at 11:30 GMT, and all participants are invited to rejoin. I'm advised to inform that we will disconnect from this link, the link that has been provided for this opening ceremony, and a new link will be sent or has been sent, and this is what we will use to resume at 11:30 GMT. Thank you so much, and we look forward to rejoining with you at 11:30. Thank you all.
Sign out, yeah?
Yeah.